stop laughing, Dave. This is the part where I say hello and welcome to the Red Mountain Community Church podcast, where you can hear conversations with the people of Red Mountain Community Church as we pursue Jesus together. Each episode highlights what God is doing in someone's life or a specific theme in light of what God has revealed in the Bible. I'm Peter Franson from Spirit Blade Productions and your fellow seat warmer at Red Mountain Community Church. My co-host today is Dave Emigh, our pastor of family and community. That's right. I had to look that up on the website.
Yeah, they keep changing my titles.
Did they?
I'm glad you reminded me of it, because sometimes I forget myself.
Did you start out as like men's ministry? I think of you as the men's ministry guy.
It was like marriage and family.
That's right.
And then I do men's ministry and
now you're
caring
pastoring
ministry.
Now you're pastoring the whole community, it sounds like.
Or something, yeah.
So you got to compare paychecks with Kyle, because he's just preaching, and you're pastoring the whole community.
We just get a couple more pieces of candy.
Okay, so let's circle back around to candy. But first, you got two smells you can choose from. Okay. I got this from I guess we call her one of our producers, Arian Rossi.
Oh, very fancy.
Little contemplative question here. You can only choose two smells. Okay. I'm going to read a list of smells. You choose two. Like
that I would smell like for the rest of my life.
That's
and I
the
lose
big question.
The rest?
It's not clear to me. Let's do this.
This is what Arian does.
Yeah. It didn't seem like it was as devilish as like you can only smell these two things, but I'm going to add that because that makes this the more awesomer. So you can only smell, like this is what you'll constantly be smelling one of these two
Forever.
smells for the rest of your life.
Oh,
okay,
man.
In your resurrected body you'll be healed of this affliction,
right. But for now.
Okay. Fresh cut grass.
Ooh.
Homemade bread. Strong coffee. Freshly washed sheets. Dark chocolate, garden dirt, campfire, gasoline,
oh man,
new books, old books, leather boots, and right before it rains.
Oh, I would. I'm a big coffee guy, so coffee for sure. And then it would be a toss-up between grass, just because being from the Midwest, you don't have a whole lot of that here in Arizona. Maybe I'll just go with those two.
Coffee and grass?
Coffee and grass.
Ugh, I wouldn't. I couldn't.
Or bread. The bread was.
No, dude, you're making a huge mistake.
You're going to gasoline? Or, I don't think you could do that very long, Peter.
I hadn't thought about gasoline. Well, if I'm just smelling it and not actually inhaling the fumes.
It's like Sharpies, right?
That's right.
Oh, Sharpies smell so good.
Well, here's my thinking about the homemade bread. Is because that sounds at a glance like a wonderful thing. But like, what if you're smelling that and you're like hungry at some point and you're not able to eat it? You're just always smelling it. But in many cases, you're going to be denied the homemade bread.
Oh, so there's affliction
maybe
within it. I
definitely am not choosing old books. If it's old books in the sense like an antique bookstore, that's one thing. But if it's old books like, this is the one we keep in the John so that you have something to read while you're in there for a while.
That's
it's like
I
don't even want to like think about touching books that have been in those kinds of places. So, like, what are those books? Like, there are books that are specifically marketed to be, toilet reading.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, what would a person do if they see that in a used bookstore? Could you ever sell that at a used bookstore?
Well, you got to wonder,
horrifying.
too, like, you're not carrying in, like, the best germs in the bathroom. And if everybody's touching that book.
Oh, yeah.
Man, you made me rethink, like, actually picking that book up.
I would go... Jeez Louise. I guess I'd probably go with freshly washed sheets. It's not a favorite smell of mine, but looking at this list, I just want something that's not going to be intrusive in my life. So I guess freshly washed sheets and new books, I guess.
Okay.
Ugh. Anyway, let's talk about something that's much more enjoyable to partake of in terms of our senses, and that's candy.
Sure.
So, do you guys give out candy for Halloween?
We do.
Do you, like, what kind of candy do you give out? Do you go for, like, we're just going to buy the cheapest thing and get through this, or are you like, we buy with leftovers in mind?
Well, we just buy, like, those mega bags that have, like, a variety.
Okay.
But growing up, my parents' house was down this long driveway, so kids were afraid to come to our house.
Okay.
So we never passed out candy. But then we moved to a neighborhood where, like, everybody, like, did Halloween. And we were like, this is exhausting.
Yeah.
Because, like, you had to go to Costco and buy just buckets.
Oh boy.
And it was nonstop.
Yeah.
So it like never ended.
Yeah.
So here in Arizona, we usually try to go to someone else's place.
Okay.
And then so we don't really have to engage in it. And we're to those people that put like the bowl out front.
Gotcha.
But we don't say like take one, because let's be honest,
They're
like,
never going to
nobody's
take
going
one.
to take
Yeah.
one. They're just going to take as many of the kind they like.
That's right.
And then it's just like when it's done, it's done.
Yeah.
So we haven't been egged yet. So I think we'll just keep rolling with that. So, but knock on wood, I guess it could happen this year.
We always buy with leftovers in mind. And this year there was like, it was really something of a miracle. Our local fries, the one on Wrecker and the church is on Wrecker and McDowell, but the closest one to the church, the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They, for some reason, like about 3 weeks to a month ago, had these 5-packs of full-size Reese's peanut butter cups. Those big, long 5-packs. They had a ton of them and other kind of Hershey's candies like Kit Kats and things. 29 cents for a pack of 5. I know. And it was in the back of the store. And I was in there. I can't remember for what. And I've really been trying to avoid carbs for a while. That's really been a thing that's been working for me. But peanut butter cups are like my favorite candy. And I saw those and I'm like, I am in so much trouble.
Do you put them in the fridge?
Well, I don't know where Holly put them. I bought, like 2 of those big plastic crates. No, it was one. It was just one full plastic crate, mounded full of mostly those big 5-packs.
Yeah.
So it's like an insane amount. I was going to take a picture of me laying down in them and and then put that online or something.
Instead of leaves, you're covered in Reese's.
But then I thought we'd never get rid of any of them for Halloween if people saw where they'd been. But I told Holly, you've got to hide these. Because I bought them for Halloween candy to give away. Because I was like, this is the best deal,
that's insane.
And so they've been hidden in the house for weeks now. Wow. And I don't know where they are. But I am confident we are still going to have a lot left over. And I just... I think I might even try to scare some kids away because that's an incredible find.
Yeah.
That could last me for I don't know how long.
But the tricky thing about Arizona is it's so warm. Like I always get nervous about anything chocolate. So
that's
I
true.
always tend to go for hard candy or Twizzlers. Now I guess Twizzlers could melt too, but I feel like whenever you get a candy bar, you have to eat it instantaneously or it's already melting on the way to the car from the parking lot.
That's true. Well, maybe I'll ask Holly and she'll say, oh, they're all melting. I'll say, oh, shucks. We'll put them in the freezer. I'll eat them eventually. All right. Well, I'm supposed to remind you now, you can message us on Instagram or Facebook with suggestions for fun things that we could do or talk about before the interview. So if you were bored with all this, let's see you do a better job. But for now...
That was a little passive aggressive.
For now, no, there's nothing passive about it. Come at me, bro.
Maybe just aggressive.
That's right. All right, we're going to move things along for now, though. And I guess in some kind of, I should come up with some kind of transition that factors in Halloween. We spoke to one of the undead back from the dead. That's really in poor taste, but that is creepy. But we did talk to somebody who has an amazing story that does have to do with death, and that's Drew Thorpe. Dave and I talked with him about his really close brush with death and the effect that it's had on him and the other people involved. So here's that conversation now. I hope you enjoy it. Well, Drew, thank you so much for doing this. Your face looks familiar to me, but we're just big enough of a church that I don't think we've ever talked before, but thank you for coming and doing this.
Nah, great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Before we get into kind of the main meat of what we're going to talk about, I just want to get a snapshot of you a little bit. Can you give me a brief rundown of when you came to faith in Jesus and just kind of how you became connected at Red Mountain?
Sure. Yeah. Growing up, kind of a Leave It to Beaver type childhood, we went to church on Sundays, but frankly, I don't remember even as a child, really strong connection with Jesus and that, but we went to church every Sunday. Our house wasn't necessarily what you would think of as a strong Christian, but I don't know if it was my parents, we go to church on Sundays. What we do. So got into high school, still going to church. One of my buddies from high school has moved into the area, played football with him. His dad was a pastor of a Presbyterian church, so I started going to that. got into Young Life in high school.
Okay.
And that's where really things kind of started, awareness for me. But at the same time, I was kind of in that high school thing, got into a little bit of the partying. This was like my junior year in high school, and, wasn't really going down a great path. Actually had some, that, high hormone, independence, frustrations that, a lot of teenagers go through going on. And, I wasn't in a great spot. But I had signed up for Young Life camp. Hadn't been before. And so that summer, went to that, and that was where, my life changed. That's where, I came to know Jesus. I remember committing, to him on the rooftop of the cabin, staring up at the sky after one of the big, group sessions, worship sessions that we had. And so that was, that's very vivid and point in time when I remember that, and my life really did change quite a bit at that point. Now, I won't say that I bore a tremendous amount of fruit over the next, several years. Went off to college, kind of got back into the college life and some of those, things. But, I reflect back now and I think, man, God just had me in his hands because he protected me through a lot of potentially really bad scenarios, kept me from making some certain bad decisions, even though I wasn't necessarily on the right path with them. Got married, started having, kids and family. We went to church. My wife grew up in the southwest side of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're both from Michigan, both from Grand Rapids, but she grew up in the southwest side, which was kind of the Christian Reformed side. So, it was a lot more of a religious area of town.
Okay.
So she grew up, and the expectation was we're going to church as a family, which was like, okay, yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
So we did. We tried a couple different churches, but none of them really clicked for me. And then, as God often does, he kind of got our attention. My wife was diagnosed with cancer in 2000. Went through chemo, radiation, and that. She's been cancer-free for 21 years. Praise God. He really worked his miracles in that whole ordeal. But he also used that to bring us back closer to him and closer to the church. We had been going to a Baptist church by our home at the time. And we were, we were attending, but not really engaged. And from that point on, we really started getting much more engaged and, started growing. And that's probably where my relationship really started growing more as well. So, for the last, 20 years, it's been, kind of on that climb. We still were attending that church when we moved here in 2015. And I actually came out about 3 months before my wife. She stayed back, sell the house. My son was getting married, so they had a bunch of preparations and stuff. So I came out in end of April, beginning of May, and moved into a rental house just over in Alta Mesa over here. And she said, all right, your first job is to go find a church. So the first Saturday...
Wait, hang on. When you say April, May, you mean just this last April and May?
No, 2015.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
We've been here about 6 years.
Okay.
So... I moved into the house on a Saturday, and I was driving around the area just trying to get familiar with it.
Yeah.
And I remember driving by Red Mountain as I was driving around, but I had found a church right down the road from where we were renting. It was the Brown Road Baptist Church, and I was like, "Oh, we came from Faith Baptist Church in Linden, in Michigan." It's like, "Hey, that must be an omen," kind of thing. So they had a 10 o'clock service. I was like, perfect. So got up, drove down there, went to pull in the parking lot at like 10 to 10, and there wasn't a car around. I'm like, what? And then I happened to look, and there's like this big commercial for sale sign on the building, and I'm like, all right, maybe that wasn't a sign. But so then I started thinking, all right, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I remember that one. So I kind of got Google Maps out. I didn't remember the area real well, so I started looking and said, oh, there it is, Red Mountain. Looked up, got on the website. 10:30 service, perfect. And that was the first Sunday here. Came in, Bob was preaching, loved it, loved the message, and I got out of church, went home, or on the ride home, called my wife and said, I found the church. We're good. And so we've been coming here ever since. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So, like you mentioned that you had kids. How many kids do you have?
We have 3.
Okay.
So
and about what stage of life are they? You said one's married now.
They're all married and all in family growth stage right now. It's been the last few years have been like very productive. We have 5 grandchildren now. 3 of them new this year. So each of my kids had a child this year. So kind of, following, they took COVID seriously and stayed home, I guess. It's been just a whirlwind year. It's been crazy. Wow. I mean, I don't know that I would ask for 3 more in the same year again. My Amazon account has taken just a bashing, and that, but it's been absolutely wonderful. So I've got my oldest daughter and her husband and my now 2 granddaughters. So my latest granddaughter just came Thursday, Coral Juanita. And so my wife flew out yesterday to Virginia to spend a couple of weeks with them to help with the baby and that. But they're in Richmond, Virginia. My son and his wife, after we moved down here in 2015, they moved down here about 2 years later and live in Flagstaff. Nice. They just had their first son in April. But now we just found out they're moving to Spokane, Washington. His wife took a job up there. So we're bummed about that, but, it's a 2.5-hour plane ride versus a 2.5-hour car ride. So 6 of one, half dozen the other. And then my youngest daughter and her husband and my 2 grandsons are down in Maricopa. So they're the closest. We see them a ton. And it's grandparenthood is awesome. I will say that. It's all the joys of being a parent without all the problems of being a parent. So,
that's what I hear. Looking forward to that. Yeah, for sure. So, are you retired? You don't look old enough to be retired. So
no, we moved down here in 2015 for work. I work for APS, the utility company. Okay. I'm a manager in our kind of our finance area. I was working for a similar utility up in Michigan at the time. A friend of mine that I worked with had moved down here. She got married and her husband had moved down here. She went to work for APS and, she called me up like 6 months after she got here and was like, Drew, you got to come down. You'd love it. And I'm like, no. I have no desire to move to the desert. I didn't, not knowing really much at all about Arizona at the time. She kept bugging me, over the next couple months. And finally she called in January and said, well, they want to fly you down just to come check it out and check out the company. And I'm, Michigan, January, by this time we're already getting pretty sick of the snow. I'm like, all right, they're going to fly me down for a week in February in Arizona. Not a bad gig just for, even if it's just a vacation. So we did. My wife and I came down, actually just fell in love with the area. We spent the week driving around, a lot of time out in the superstitions, and that's how we ended up on this side of town, just because we really loved. We did some hiking out there, went up to Canyon Lake. I mean, we were, it was the first week of February. The Super Bowl was actually in town that weekend. We flew out Sunday and the plane was empty because everybody was already here for the Super Bowl. But, it was like 80 degrees. We're driving around in a convertible Camaro, when everybody back home's getting 18 inches of snow. So it was like, that had a little impact on our decision to move down here. But we've been here since 15. Absolutely love it. Especially, days like today and this time of year when that weather is just, so perfect. So
nice. Well, let's get into this, this whole story here is really interesting. What little I know about it. You, I'm told, had this really close call while whitewater rafting where something kind of amazing happened. So can you just kind of go ahead with that? Tell that story, and maybe I'll ask some clarifying questions along the way, but I just kind of want to hear you go at it and tell me.
Sure. Yeah. It all started actually several years ago. Way back in the 90s, we had a family reunion in Colorado. And a bunch of me and my cousins and my brother and them all went whitewater rafting down the Royal Gorge and had a blast. So that was kind of our indoctrination into whitewater rafting. It's like, yeah. And then, 10 years later, we were in Minnesota. We did another whitewater rafting trip there. So I've got a bunch of cousins here in Arizona, and we went on a rafting trip down the Salt River probably about 6 years ago now. I think it was like 2015, 2016, something like that. And the water level was really low. It was kind of more of a floaty ride, nothing real exciting. And, our guide was like, well, if you want to experience some really great whitewater, you ought to come up to the Animas River in Durango, in June when the snow melts running. He says that's the best whitewater rafting in the West. So that got in my cousin's head, my brother's head, and we're kind of like trying to figure this out. Well, finally, about 3 years after that, my cousin calls me and says, I just booked, a 2-day trip down the Animas, for the, in June.
So we're in 2019 now, June 2019?
Okay. 2019. And so I called my brother who's in Michigan and said, hey, dude, you in? He's like, yeah, we're in. So my cousin and his son who had just graduated from college, my brother, who's actually 12 years younger than me, and then myself went up and did a 2-day rafting trip. Well, it actually got pushed back a month because the snow melt was so high that year, or the snow level was so high that they couldn't run the river for like a month because it was just so high. Even when we got there, it was still running above safe runnable levels. There was parts of it that we couldn't even run, but we got on it. But it was an epic trip. It was great. Stayed on the river overnight. Between the first and second day, and then the second day we ran the bottom half of the run, and it was incredible. Even the guides were going crazy. It was just like some of the best conditions for rafting. So it was exciting. We got out. In the Animas runs between Silverton and Durango, which is like pure wilderness. There's no, in between there. The only way in and out of that is the train. There's a narrow gauge train that runs along the river the whole way up. So the rafting crews, they put in at Silverton, and then the train picks them up kind of halfway down is like the end of the run. So, we got out, we finished the bottom of the run on the second day, pulled the rafts out, and broke all the equipment down. We're waiting for the train to come and basically pick us up. So all the stuff's piled next to the tracks, and, what the train's supposed to come up, we quick throw everything on, and, then they head on down the tracks. So, excuse me. So we're sitting around, we're just waiting for the train. It was due no real time schedule on that one. It's just whenever they get there. So we're sitting around, we'd changed our clothes and everything was ready. And my brother, my cousin, myself, a bunch of and probably 3 or 4 of the rafting guides, we're just sitting around on some logs, chit-chatting, reminiscing on the run. And, oh man, that rapids was great and all that. And I stood up and I got super lightheaded. I mean, just more than I'd ever had. And I remember saying, uh-oh. I stood up and I went, uh-oh. And that was the last thing I remember. Next thing I remember, I opened my eyes and I was laying on my back and I was being jostled around, and one of the rafting guides was above me, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, well, we're carrying you across the river to catch the helicopter. And I'm like, oh, cool. Not really comprehending any of it. But that was, it's interesting when we talk about it. It's like I have my version, and then there's the version that everybody else experienced. Because I literally was, I remember passing out, and I remember that last second and then waking up, and that I don't have any personal recollection in between that. But then, having the conversation with, my brother and cousin and all the rafting crew and everything afterwards, the story kind of came together, and that's where it got really interesting. So,
well, we should have had them on then.
Yeah. Well, one of the most interesting aspects of this whole thing has been going back. So I've been back, my wife and I have been back twice now to Durango to meet with all of, the crew that saved my life effectively, which we'll get to. But, the interesting part has been piecing all their stories together. And my wife made an observation at one point. She said, it's interesting how, you could have 10 people witness the exact same thing and every one of them will have a different version of, because they're coming from it from their perspective. And it is really interesting, when we had these conversations, and a lot of them were like in a group setting where they're all there and, they hadn't really had the opportunity to kind of gather and talk through it either. So, they're all kind of playing off each other. Oh, remember? No, that was this. Yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, so the compilation of experiences basically was, I stood up and passed out, fell like a tree straight back, hit my head on the log that I had just stood up from.
Oh my gosh.
And my cousin to this day says the sound that made, haunts him.
Yeah.
But so fell back, hit my head, and my heart stopped. And a bunch of the, like I said, a bunch of the river guides were right there. My brother, my cousin, they all jumped up and, starting to kind of, okay, what's going on? They're worried about my head. They're not sure what's, they realize my heart's not beating. And they, from what I could tell, they spent maybe 15, 20 seconds trying to figure it out. And two of them just said, well, whatever, we're going to start CPR. Right. So, the guide from our raft for the whole trip, young guy, California born. I mean, he's your typical California. He's blonde hair, blue eyes, long blonde hair, great kid. He jumps on, starts doing compressions. And then one of the other guys jumps and starts doing, the mouth to mouth. So they went for about 7 minutes. Before, kind of they were tired. And then second crew came in, two more of the river guides came in. Somewhere in there, when the second crew was on, the train shows up. And the engineer on the train, 22-year-old young lady, just happened to be an EMT in a past life. She's only 22.
Wow.
And she's already got a past life.
Wow.
So she jumps off the train and, initially she's like upset. It's like, why isn't everybody standing here ready to throw equipment in? And sees everybody huddled around, not far from the train. So she gets down, they let her know what's going on. So she hollers back to the other engineer and says, hey, grab the AED. And she comes over. Sorry, that's like one of those portable defibrillator devices.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so it comes in a little box.
Yeah.
And so she walks up, and this part was kind of funny when we were telling about it, because she said she walked up and here was this guy laying on the ground, probably 14 shades of gray. And the guys said to her, hey, we think he's coming back. And she said I looked down and I said, guys, this guy's dead. Get out of my way. So she jumps in. The guys are still doing CPR, and she hooks up the AED. She takes over part of the compressions as well. Hits me with the AED. Nothing. They keep compressions. Hits me again with the AED. Nothing. Finally, on the third time, she hits me with the AED, and my heart starts again. So this was about 17 minutes total time from when I went down to when my heart started again. So that point, there was like, well, how are we getting them out of here? Do we put them on the train? And they're like, no, we can't do that. My brother actually was kind of he's like, no, we're not doing a train thing. Get a helicopter in here. So they flew a helicopter in, which that was a whole different ordeal from what I understand. We had like, some like ultra high-end pilot flying in under power lines and all kinds of stuff to get in there. It was like bizarre. And then, so they carried me across the river. Where we pulled out was actually an old power plant on the river, the Tacoma power plant. And there was a bridge across the river there, and there was a flat spot over by the power plant for the helicopter. But like I said, some power lines.
Wow.
Not energized, I don't think, but just wires.
Oh, yeah.
Still kind of mess up a helicopter.
Yeah.
But so they carried me across the river, got me on the helicopter eventually, and, flew me to Durango Memorial Hospital. And
it, like you said at some point earlier that you woke up and said something while they were taking you to the helicopter?
Yeah, so it was actually, we were on the bridge when we were going over the bridge when I finally came conscious. So from what I gathered, from what they were saying, when my heart started, everybody just cheered. And, because, it was literally like, 17 minutes, and God, I can't, thankful they kept going, right?
Yeah.
At this point. But then when I woke up and was in one of the rafting guides was the guy over me. And, when I said, hey, what's going on? And they all kind of were like cheering again.
Wow,
like, hey, he's really here.
Wow.
They did, we got on the other side. And my short-term memory was fried. And I don't know if it was, from being down for that long, or if they say that when you get hit with a defibrillator like that, that'll kind of scramble your noodle a little bit as well. So I know my short-term memory was, and there's all kinds of funny stories about that too. But yeah, so it was fried. So I have like very short vignettes or snippets of memory.
Gotcha.
Kind of between, really, from the point of waking up to, even coming home on, a few days later. But, I remember Kyla, the engineer from the train, she was running me through some 20 questions. Like, I do remember these. It was funny that I remember them. It's like she said, all right, do you know what year it is? And I remember thinking, no idea. She goes, do you know who the president is? I'm like, nope, not a clue.
Wow.
And then she points to my brother who was standing right next to me. And she said, well, you know who this guy is? And I look up, oh yeah, it's my brother. And he's like, all right, we're good. If he knows that, we're all right. And so that was fun. I guess we played a couple games of that over the next few minutes. But, she said it was the thing. So for me, it was really weird because all I remember is I remember going down. I remember waking up, right? So not a big deal for me, but, what the rest of them experienced, during that time period has really been kind of the remarkable part of the story. And, some of the individual accounts and how it affected their lives was really some of the most interesting of everything for sure.
I want to get into that. But right before we do that, though, you pretty much answered one question that I was going to ask, but I'll ask something a little bit different from a different angle. I was going to ask you if you remembered anything, during the time they were trying to revive you, and clearly you said no. How do you feel about that when you hear about people that had these close calls and they had these kinds of experiences? Do you feel like, I missed out, or what? Do you have any feelings about that, one or the other?
So it's interesting because everybody asked the question, right?
Sure,
They're like, did you see the white light? Kind of thing, or have one of those stories. And I didn't. I honestly, I don't remember it. It might be part, God may have said, hey, we probably had a 17-minute conversation. He said, well, you're not going to remember this, so.
I'll refresh your memory next time.
Yeah. But, it's funny. I was talking with Dan Acosta, and he's in our life group here.
Okay.
And I was telling him about it. And I was like, it didn't bother me, but it was, something on my mind. Why didn't I?
Yeah.
And he said, well, from what I've experienced, and he's had some experience with this, I think with his military career and everything else, he said, the people that need to have the experience do, and those that don't.
Interesting.
General comment, not hard and fact, but, that made sense to me because going in, I have a very good strong relationship with Jesus, and, have no doubt where I'm going and, all of that. So I my salvation was not in question, and I've actually gone on like the internet and looked up other people's stories, just trying to kind of check. And there was only one. The other part about the whole 17 minutes is another aspect of, kind of the miracle of this whole thing. But I went on and I found one other person a woman that had gone kayaking, went over a falls, and then got forced to the bottom and kind of in the tumblers of the falls, and was held there for like 30 minutes, and then finally spit her out, and they were able to resuscitate her. And she did have this big, amazing experience that she talked about.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that one.
But it was funny, but it held perfectly true to what Dan said, because even after having that experience, she still wasn't, she was thought, oh, there's something else out there and things like that. It wasn't like, God, I had a conversation with God, which I felt bad for her, then fortunate to have that experience. But so from my perspective, I'm comfortable with, not having, had that, the white light experience or, out of body, but, would have been fun,
but you do find yourself now in this interesting position of, it almost sounds like from your perspective, you're like you have this front row seat to these other stories now that you've heard about, that you are just kind of the common pivot point, but there's some interesting things that you've learned that just went on with other people that were around you. So tell me about, those that were with you. You said your brother, cousin, the train conductor, anybody else involved that has something that comes to mind that's memorable to you about how they were impacted.
Yeah, the whole impact of, the experience, like I said, being down for 17 minutes, I didn't really fathom, what that meant, but have since, been told by many folks, a lot of medical professionals and that. In fact, my cardiologist, when I got back to Phoenix, actually walked in the room and said, I need to hug this guy. Apparently people just don't come back from that, Effectively, she told me, you were dead for 17 minutes and you came back. And she said, and you have no mental impairment or anything. She said people that go down for 1 minute or 2 minutes can have mental impairment, so, and, the guys did a great job, they did, but, I think everybody realized that it was, God played a huge role in all of this. There was no way this happens, without that. And all of the guys realized that, that, and they realized it pretty quickly. Nickel, the first guy to jump on the compressions, California kid, great kid. Most of the guys came and visited me in the hospital on Tuesday. So this happened on a Sunday, Happened on a Sunday, probably started around 3 p.m. I don't know, in my timeline from there, with my short-term memory. Totally right. There's some funny stories in there too. We'll maybe touch on some of those, but, so Nickel was, probably 21, 22 at the time. They all showed up, all the guys. They're all, how you doing? Nickel walked in the room. He was crying from the minute he walked in the room to the minute he walked out. The whole time. He just, I've got a picture of all of us in the room, and, he's crying. And, I had a chance to talk to him after the first time we went back in October of that year. So my wife and I, this happened in July. We went back in October to meet up with all of them. And he said, as he was giving me the compressions, he could feel on every compression the cartilage snapping in my rib cage.
Jeez.
So every compression he heard crack, 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 and he says he still hears it. So he's got PTSD. He bought a puppy the next day. The next morning he went and bought a puppy. He says that puppy hasn't left him since. So really impacted him. But once we kind of reconnected, he said, and being able to see the results of what I had another grandchild after that that September between the event and seeing them, and I would have never had that experience or seen that grandchild, and being able to relay that to him and expressed to him how God had used him in this and how miraculous it was, for him. The other guys, had very similar, they've come to me and said, man, this experience just, changed my life in this way or that way. Probably the most significant that for me and for her was Kyla. So,
and that was
she was the engineer from the train.
Okay.
Yeah. It was funny. It was like 2 weeks after it all happened. Or it was the second week after, sometime that second week. I was at home, and I had been communicating with a couple of the guys, the rafting guys, and I didn't know who she was. I didn't have any contact information, so I had asked one of them can you get me her number? I want to reach out to her. So I did. They got me a number, and it took me a couple of days. I really was like, how do I reach out to this person? I just want to connect. So finally I sent her a text. I said, hi, Kyla, this is Drew. I'm the guy whose life you saved. And, I just wanted to tell you, what an angel you are and all that. And she texted me back like 2 minutes later. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad to hear from you. I've been wondering how you're doing, because I didn't realize it. I mean, none of them knew, how things fared afterwards. In fact, she didn't know after she left, after I flew away. So there was no, she had no follow-up. So she sends me a note back and says, oh, I'm so excited. Yes, I can't wait to meet you and that. And, when we get together, then I can tell you how you saved my life too. So I read this in a text and I'm like, is that like, oh, you saved my life? I had a bet, I was supposed to go on a date that night and I got out of it because of it, or, kind of thing. So I was, I'm like, I showed my wife, I'm like, what do you make of this? And she's like, oh yeah, you definitely got to talk to her. So we scheduled some time, she's working all the time on the, with the train. Her schedule was crazy. So I was, trying to find time and we finally found a time. It was early Sunday morning, like 7:00 on a Sunday morning. I was actually up in Flagstaff at my son's house and went out on the front porch with a cup of coffee and, we connected and we were just, chit-chatting for a few minutes. And finally I was like, I said, when I first texted you, you responded back something. And, I really wanted to ask you about that. She goes, yeah, I know. So she regaled her story to me kind of from her perspective. After everything had happened, she told me the helicopter took off. She had to go get back on the train. She runs the train and has to take, everybody back, further down the tracks. So she gets in the train, they get everything loaded up and they get going down and it's like another 25, 30 minutes to the next stop, where they let some folks off. And she said she was in the cab of the engine and with the other engineer. And she said the enormity of what had just happened just really hit her. And she said she started crying. She said she was sobbing and the other engineer's like, are you okay? She's like, yeah, I'm great. And what had happened was before she arrived at the site where I was at, they were on their way down from Silverton. Her boyfriend of a year and a half had just broken up with her. She was in a really bad place. And she was actually planning her suicide on the train, on the trip down to the site.
Wow.
And then gets there, obviously, and everything transpires. And when she got back on the train afterwards, she realized God had just reached out and said, you are my special instrument, and I've got plans for you, and that's where she just broke down. She's and she's telling me the story. She's crying, I'm crying. I mean, it's it was so emotional.
Sure,
but it was just so special. And I told her, I said, well, I have no idea why this happened, why God chose me to do this. But, if the only reason for this whole thing to happen was, for that was for you to experience that, then I'll do it again. No, my wife said, no, you won't. She said, once is enough. So it's just, that's the most special for me, and we've become really close with her, kind of almost like her and Nickel. Those two is like we've almost adopted them as as other children.
That's
in
great.
That, and so that's been really cool. And there's 12 total. I mean, this was like a big group, so it's like we have this whole separate family, or second family up in Durango right now.
Wow.
It's 11 rafting guides in Kyla. So
it's amazing.
but it's pretty neat. So
Well, I'm just going to take a weird left turn because you alluded to this and that we could come back to it. So tell me, now that we've talked about the really heavy, amazing thing, tell me something goofy you said, or something weird and funny that went on when your short-term memory was shot.
So so one was the faux pas, and my wife was back here, Gail. Yeah. She's back here. We all flew up there, and we were supposed to fly back. So she's here. We're in the hospital. My brother's, basically running point. My cousin and his son actually had to catch we were all supposed to catch a flight that night, so they ended up catching a flight back home. And then my brother stayed. So he's, my short-term memory, literally, I don't remember any of this, obviously, but it was funny because apparently I would ask my brother, so what's going on? Why am I here? What happened? So he would go through the whole story, you fell down, hit your head, CPR, train, defibrillator, helicopter, all that. And 5 minutes later, it'd say, dude, why am I here? What happened? So he said after, probably 7, 8, 9, 10 times of regaling me of this whole thing, that started to get shorter and shorter. Yeah. So by the time I actually retained anything memory-wise, all I remember was I stood up, I passed out, and I hit my head. That was it.
Yeah.
And that's all I, remember. So later that night, so still Sunday night, he asked me, he says, hey, do you want me to have Gail fly up here? And I'm like, I fell over and hit my head. Nah, we're good. So that's what I remember. That's what I tell him. It's like, no, we're good, So I didn't think anything else of it. The next day, they took me in for an angiogram. This was part of the, whole medical side of this thing. And anyway, so we had some tests and all that, and then I think he asked me the next day, or I talked to her the next day, or was texting with her, and nothing. Still, there wasn't any clear communication of what had transpired to her at this point. Finally, on Tuesday, the second day, the article in the Durango Herald came out with a picture of the helicopter, and man nearly dies on river as the title kind of thing. Gets through family members to my wife. And she's like, all of a sudden I get the call. She goes, what do you mean you almost died?
Oh my God.
So then I look at my brother, I'm like, have you told Gail anything yet? And he's like, no, not yet. And I'm like, uh-oh. Yeah. So we were both in the doghouse for that. When we finally flew home on Wednesday, we got off the plane, and her and my daughter and her husband picked us up at the airport. She couldn't even, it was like she was so mad at us, but so glad we were there. Her emotions were she couldn't even hardly look at me. And then she started hollering at me there, you never do that again.
Gosh.
But, I felt terrible. And I felt bad for my brother because he was trying to protect her, and, he didn't really know. The other part that went a little sideways on that one was he did tell my son kind of what was going on, and then they decided, so they didn't really fill in my wife either right away. So, it was just a bad scene. We made a pact that anytime anything like this ever happens again, God forbid, that be full disclosure from the beginning. But, so that one was a little crazy. One of the things that was kind of weird was that she mentioned is the day that it happened, that Sunday afternoon, she was sitting around the house, and we have 2 Australian Shepherds. And at this time, it was before pre-COVID, so I was, I would go to work every day, downtown, and I would come home, and we have this app on our phones, the Life 360 app, so you can track where everybody's at by their phone, right? Well, as soon as I would get close to the gate, her phone, she had a setting set that would go ding, and then she would say, "Oh, Dad's home," and the dogs would run to the window in the front, and the one dog would stick his nose through the blinds and just stare out until my car pulled in the driveway, and then they would run around. She said it was like Sunday afternoon, similar time frame. We can't completely nail down the time, where she said it was just so weird because all of a sudden Decker, the dog, just got up and ran to the front window and just stuck his nose in the blinds. And that's the only time he would ever do it. She said other time he'd bark at the door and everything. And she said he stuck his nose in the blinds and just stared. She's like, "Decker, Dad's not home. Dad's not coming. He's not, that's not him." So she said it was just really weird. It's kind of that same time. She's like, "I don't know, maybe you were there." I don't know. But
wow.
So,
man, interesting.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine. I mean, well, I had 2 more questions. I want to keep them open ended, so I'm gonna kind of combine them into one and just leave it kind of open ended. But I would think that something like this is just such a major thing that kind of splits your personal life calendar in half, right? And so I'm curious if kind of what your relationship like God was like beforehand, that maybe something about it is different, and kind of on along the same lines. Do you wonder or suspect or maybe feel like you have clarity on anything that God might specifically be calling to you now in this second half of your life, that's kind of like having been given this second chance, as it were?
Yeah. Probably one of the frankly, I struggled with that a little bit right afterwards, because it wasn't your, kind of your typical, near-death experience where, I didn't have any like chest pains, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm dying" kind of feelings, right? I didn't have that scare factor beforehand. And the fact that I just kind of passed out and woke up, was my experience personally. It's kind of like, I didn't understand the magnitude of the whole thing for some time, having taught, I had to actually experience it through others, testimonies about it. And so it was a little bit of a, I understood in theory what it was. It was a miracle, So the question was, okay, God, why me? What are you, what am I supposed to do with this? I had, like I said, my faith was really strong going into it. So, my faith coming out of it was as strong or stronger. But it was more, I think it was more around focus on what I should be doing. And where, I don't know, this one's even almost sometimes hard to express, of where I am in this, cosmic timeline. One of my realizations that became very clear is I'm already living in eternity. So having, when you die and come back, it's kind of like, okay, which is kind of cool. It gives me a very different perspective, that when I do finally die, I'm just going to a different place. I'm just going to heaven. So that transition point became less of an issue for me. So having already died, maybe I'm not as afraid of it, or I don't know how to really express that. But the other thing probably that I've come to realize is, I think God has a bigger plan, right? And, Dave, you turned me on to, the Matthew Barnett's book, A
Cause Within You.
The Cause Within You. And, the one thing about, reading through that is, he's got a big plan for everybody, right? So I think it's, but the other thing too is it's in his time, right? So the other thing I struggled with is, okay, what should I be doing? Should I be doing something right now? Am I wasting my time, in that? But I think that book actually helped me to realize, it's in God's time, and, just be ready for it, but don't, try and
orchestrate it.
Yeah, don't try and orchestrate it. Just wait for it to come. So I think that's helped me in probably the last 6 months to a year. I've been much more at peace with, there's something else coming. I'm confident in that. And I don't know what that could be. I mean, I don't feel like that, I'm like supposed to be a pastor. That's not something that, from that perspective, but I don't know what that is, but I think I am, continually being tested in different areas of my life. So I think that's, preparing, kind of that preparation for things to come,
Well, and even so, still, like you said about, the interaction with the train conductor. I mean, even that, the way God used that, and you said, hey, I'd go through this all over again, right? If it was just to impact her in that way. And so I think sometimes we think, hey, I got to figure out, because I made it through this, like what my purpose is. Obviously the Lord used you in magnificent ways in a plethora of different avenues for all 11 people there. I mean, even in that moment, wow, for God to use you and for you to listen to the Spirit in that moment to say, I need to reach out. A lot of people could have said, hey, I'm alive, this is great, I'm going on. But for you to take those extra steps to engage with those other individuals and like, wow, how did this impact them, and that God has a bigger story for them, and like I want them to understand that, and like to see that the ripple effects of that like are probably vast beyond what you'll ever understand. So even as you're trying to figure out what is God calling me to in this next season, like he's already done like amazing things through you and will continue probably through all those relationships. So I think it's just like amazing.
Yeah.
Like when you see the way God uses relationships to just continue a miracle to keep going. I mean, it's because that's obvious. Like it didn't stop at that moment. Like you said, it's an eternal blessing that's just the ripple effects are amazing. So I just think this is the second time I got to hear the story. So like it's awesome the second time around. Like it's so cool. Like thank you so much for sharing this with us, Drew. It's awesome.
And those relationships are actually, it's kind of fun to see, kind of where are they going. So Kyla went back to school. She was an EMT, which the EMT is kind of the ambulance drivers. But they can't do a lot. But she wanted to go back to school because the paramedics that got off the helicopter, and helicopter paramedics apparently are like the special forces of paramedics, right? They're the serious ones and that. And just kind of being in that situation and, basically saving my life inspired her to go back. So she went back to school to become a paramedic, and she just graduated in May. In fact, we went up to Durango, to celebrate her graduation, and now she's met another guy. They're getting married next, a year from next month. One of the guys, the gentleman that first gave me mouth to mouth, Don, he and his fiance are both going back to school now to be nurses. They're going to nursing school. And I just got a letter from them this summer asking if I would be the officiant at their wedding next July. So I actually got one of those online certifications a couple years ago for my daughter. That was a weird scenario. But, so I got that. I had that, and they want me to marry them because of the relationship that we have now, which I'm super excited about, and just. I guess overall, I mean, it's just humbling, to, that he chose me to do that for first, which I don't know I don't know if I was deserving of it or what his purpose is, but it's his plan. I've come to grips. He's got a plan, and I'm not going to try and second guess it. And, from that perspective, but you say, commitment, just really to focus on being the person that he wants me to be, right? We talked a little bit, there's, the last couple of years have been really, tumultuous with a lot of the cultural things going on, a lot of the political things going on. And, all of that was really kind of disturbing just from all of the dissent and, bitterness that was around. And, at one point, he helped me to understand that, there's three things that are important, love God, love your neighbor as yourself, and share the gospel. And, if you just focus on those three, everything else kind of falls into line as far as importance. And that's helped, that has since I don't even know how to describe it. It's funny. People are like, what is it? The incident, the episode, the event. Yeah.
Think of some cheeky name for it.
I don't even, but since then, I have been able to really understand and comprehend kind of what the peace that God wants for us. And, to help me to deal with the things that, before I thought, were pretty critical. And now I'm like, well, that's just so inconsequential to even worry about. So, to attain that, God's perfect peace would be, that would be the ultimate goal, because then you wouldn't worry about anything around here. But it was funny, where our life group is going through the Truth Project.
Oh yeah.
And at the end of the first video, there was a question, and it just literally, I sat back in my chair after I saw it. I was like, wow. It was, if do you really believe that what you believe is really real? And I sat back and thought about that and went, wow, how profound. It's like, if you really believe that heaven is what we think it is, and that being with God is going to be as amazing, then why do we fear death? Right? So it's, even as Christians, we still fear, dying and leaving this world. But if it's going to be so much better, in the other place, that's kind of, it was funny. One of the things is I don't fear death, but I have to keep myself from wanting to go. It's kind of like, all right, I'm ready. Let's go. What's next? But
Well, I imagine that you've gone over these details and told these stories many, many times, but I really, really appreciate the chance to hear it myself, and for us to record this and share it with, our church family and anybody else that wants to listen. So Drew, thank you very, very much for taking time out to do this.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. Thanks.
All right. Well, you don't hear that kind of story every day, at least not from somebody you know. I mean, those are that's like an internet type story. That's like that, oh yeah, there was this guy on the news that you hear about, absolutely. But you don't get to usually talk to somebody firsthand. And you guys listening didn't either, so keep looking for your person that you can talk to. But that was, that was something. What's something that just bubbles to the surface about that conversation as you think about it?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to hear the mini version over lunch with Drew months ago, and I was like, man, this is a story that just needs to be shared. Because like you said, Peter, you don't hear stories like that all the time. You hear about them, or you watch some Dateline show on them or something like that. So I think the thing that's just stood out to me the most is how the Lord just uses situations in grander ways than we could ever imagine. And so there were so many splinter or ripple stories that came out of Drew's story that continue, that God continues to use to bring glory to his name. And it's just so cool to hear Drew just be obedient to that. So that was one of the things I think that just really stood out to me, was Drew's obedience and humbleness of God's calling upon his life and desire to follow him more, and just how a situation, sometimes God puts us in these wild situations to bring glory to him, and how it can be so transformative to strangers' lives. And the mission field is kind of where you are. Yeah. So it's not necessarily in a foreign country, but it could be on the banks of a river in Durango. Yeah. And how we should just be just aware, open to those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I'd say that stood out to me.
Yeah, very similar to me. I mean, of course, like the part of the story about I believe her name was Kyla. Is that right?
Yeah.
The train director, and of course, with what she was contemplating and planning and stuff, and then the sharp turn that took. But what was equally impactful and interesting to me about that is the connection that he maintained with her and with the others that were involved, and the opportunity he's had now to invest in these people's lives that he never would have had before.
Right.
And I think, as you said, there's like these ripple effects that I think we're not aware of, that, there are people that are in my life and in your life that you didn't have this like close call with. That's not the thing that binds you, but there's something else that has brought you to this point where you have these people in your life that you can invest in and that you can love, and that your words have, for whatever reason, have some weight in their lives. And so I think, to see that as amazing, even when it's not brought about by what we would call amazing circumstances, I think is kind of a takeaway, that I see coming from this story. So, that was great. Well, and that is it for this episode of the Red Mountain Community Church podcast. You can follow Red Mountain Community Church on Instagram and Facebook, where you can also leave us comments and suggestions to help make the show better. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on the next episode, which is going to be amazing. I actually have no idea what's happening on the next episode, but I'm pretty sure
But
it's
it
going to
will be amazing.
I'm pretty sure. In the meantime, I'm Peter Franson, and who are you?
Dave Emigh.
I forgot to prep him before. Dang it,
Sometimes
Peter.
I forget my name.
No,
it's like
I
short-term memory.
dropped the ball. I was supposed to go over see, I have this right here, co-host, and I'm blank. And I was going to remind, I'm sorry. Failure once again, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Sunday. So do you have like a thing in your head about the interview?
I could come up with something. No, it was just more.
Well, no, don't say it yet.
Okay.
I'm just asking if you have it in your head.
There's something in there.
Okay.
If not, I have short term like Drew, and I'll just be like, I don't know.
Are we running over there? We're good?
That's a good thing to throw at the end.
I had something, Peter, but I lost it like Drew.